Right. Well, welcome back to this second session of our conference today, A New Era for Green Infrastructure. I'm Fiona Howie, I'm the Chief Executive of the Town and Country Planning Association, and I'm delighted to be chairing the second session today, which is focused on improving green infrastructure at landscape and city scale for people and the environment. So I must thank the organisation supporting the conference today again, which is the Landscape Institute, Heatherwick Studio and Green Blue Urban, and thanks to them we're able to put this event on for free today, so many thanks. In case people weren't able to join us for the first session, I just must reiterate, if you are sharing information on social media, please do use the hashtag on the screen, so New Era GI, and we will be sharing recordings of all of the sessions after the event today. As people will hopefully have seen from the agenda, the format for this session will be 3 presentations from our fantastic panel members, who I will introduce in turn, and then there will be time for questions and discussions. So if you do have questions for our panel members and our presenters, please do use the Q&A function, which is hopefully at the bottom of your screen. If you can put them in there, we will try and keep an eye on them, and I will try and bring those into the session after each of our 3 speakers have presented. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, who is Lisa Finlay, who's partner and group leader of Heatherwick Studio. Lisa is responsible for a wide range of projects, including a vision for the future of Nottingham city centre and a pioneering new office building in Madrid. Prior to this, Lisa completed the transformation of London's Coal Drops Yard, which comprised the restoration and redevelopment of 2 Victorian industrial buildings to create a new retail quarter and public realm in King's Cross. Prior to joining Heatherwick Studio, Lisa founded 7N Architecture Practice in Edinburgh in 2009, where she delivered 2 award-winning projects in social housing and public realm, whilst leading large-scale cultural-led regeneration projects for Scottish Enterprise, British Waterways, and the Glasgow Canal Regeneration Partnership. So welcome, Lisa, and over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. I'll just share my screen. So hopefully you can see my title slide now. Yeah, okay, great. Well, it's a pleasure to be asked here to join this panel discussion and the whole event. So I'm Lisa Finlay, a partner at Heatherwick Studio. Just going to say a little bit about ourselves first. So we're a design studio based in King's Cross. We've been going for over 27 years. And we work on a whole range of projects, from furniture through to master plans and transport and buildings. And we work internationally, so we have around 30 live projects in different cities around the world. And we don't focus on any particular scale or typology. We're kind of very open to what kind of design challenges that we're faced with. And our design approach is very much centered around craft and making. But we pair this with as many sustainable measures as possible. And so that includes things like material selection, energy generation on site, water management, biodiversity, and adaptive reuse. So these are some of our completed projects. And on the left, just to mention here, because it's the most recently opened project, you could say it opened in May. This is one of our Google projects in California. And this has integrated photovoltaics in the building, but also in the landscape. There's a very positive water story where we've created retention ponds that capture roughly 7 million gallons of stormwater and create new wetlands and habitats. So that's kind of an example of some of our projects. And here, this is another kind of selection of completed projects where it's exploring how to integrate nature into cities. So from a residential tower in Singapore in the top left, university building bottom left again in Singapore, a new public park in New York top right, and bottom right is a mixed use development in Shanghai, which also has new Riverside Park. So we're very passionate about integrating green space and nature into cities. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our experiences closer to home, so in Nottingham in Broadmarsh, and to talk a little bit about our experience there. And I'll also touch briefly on Little Island at the very end. So Broadmarsh, this is one of the images that was released last year when we did a 3-month vision exercise for the site. And this is showing the green space, the green heart it's a new green space for the centre of the city. But the project is about much more than a green space in a way. It's about thinking about the future of cities and what the regeneration of a city centre like Nottingham could be. And this is what it looked like when we first went to see the site. We first started working in Nottingham in the middle of lockdown, so in 2020, and this is what we saw. So, it's right in the heart of the city, and there was a half demolished shopping centre representing the failure of retail. And there was a dominance of vehicles and car infrastructure. If you looked forward, you saw a car park. If you looked behind you, you saw a car park. And in the back, you could see green, well-established green spaces, but not green spaces that people could enjoy. And the council really knew that something radical had to happen here to transform what the heart of the city was. And they launched a public consultation around that time, so late 2020. They launched a consultation called The Big Conversation, and it ran for over 2 months. And they asked residents of the city what they wanted to happen to the Broadmarsh shopping centre and to the Broadmarsh site generally. And that was really the starting process of raising the ambition for the site. And a lot of the feedback was about the desire and the need for green space. And quite a few people saying, can you just knock it all down and can we have a park? Don't build anything back, just green space. But what it just came through so strongly how much the need for green space there was. But our work didn't start on that project. Our work in the city started somewhere differently. So we started working in 2020 for the Culture Board. So Nottingham had set up a Culture Board for the city. And this Culture Board is to look at the creative projection for the city and to reinvigorate the creativity in the city. And they set up the board a bit differently. So they set it up with a really diverse, creative young group of people from all different aspects of the city. So you have filmmakers, you have street food experts, you have the universities, you have people in the nightclub scene, you have youth sport charities, you have Paralympians in there, and these kind of really passionate group of advocates that were at deep connections in the city. And these were the kind of organisations that they represented. From music to makers to theatre to library to reading to universities, all sorts of different aspects. And that was a really great sounding board for us to understand the needs of what people wanted, but also kind of level of ambition as well. And when we started to talk to all these different groups that the Culture Board were connected to, our challenge was to come up with kind of 10 ideas, creative ideas for the city that could happen within the next 10 years. And that would be part of reinvigorating the creative scene in the city. And there was things coming back like outdoor performance space or, really pushing the heritage of the city. Nottingham has got an incredible landscape of sandstone caves underneath it, over hundreds of caves underneath the city that not everybody knows about. But there was also, again, this need for greening the city, radical greening of the city, bringing the forest back into the city, and how much green space can we have? And so that piece of work ended with a series of ideas that had short-term aspirations, so short-term ideas, things like a street-for-street culture, and that has now already been implemented in Bridlesmith Gate. Medium-term ideas, things like bringing outdoor performance spaces to the city, and then long-term ideas. And that's where aspirations for the Broadmarsh came in. And it was kind of an obvious place where something should really happen. And the city then invited us to tender for the vision for the Broadmarsh. And we were fortunate enough to be selected. And the vision piece looked at this extent of red land. So this land here is majority council owned. And it wasn't just the shopping centre, it extended all the way to the castle and to the west, to the college to the east, and included the new library, and was really a kind of a central part of the city centre. And the brief was ambitious. So it talked about, designing in a new age of sustainability, talked about being deliverable, soulful, sustainable, and designing something that can be built, achieved incrementally as well. And this was a really powerful brief for us to think, what are we really trying to achieve here? And so what we wanted to achieve with the vision was to think of a place where we can where it's possible to bring people back together in the city centre. A lot of the conversations we had with people was kind of saying how they didn't see the need to go there anymore. It didn't feel relevant to them. It didn't feel like a place they wanted to go. But what would make people go was green space was one of the aspects, but there was a lot of other activities that people wanted in the city centre beyond retail. So things like community spaces, allotments, places for outdoor performance, places for making films, for youth sports, all sorts of kind of interesting activities. And so we wanted to create a place that could bring all these different activities together in a mutual space. And then also very mindful that Nottingham had very publicly set itself the ambition and target of being carbon neutral by 2028. So that also influenced our approach to what we should do with the existing buildings. So specifically the shopping centre, our approach was to say, don't demolish any more of it. Let's see what we can do with that existing structure. And also really key buildings in and around that red line. The other buildings that we felt could and should be retained for all the new uses coming in. So this is the vision that we prepared. So it includes space for new workspace, new homes, new mixed use spaces, new hotels. And some of that is accommodated within existing buildings, but also at the very heart of the master plan vision is the retention of the Broadmarsh frame and a new green space for the city. So right in the centre is that green heart space. And this is a sort of sketch visual that's been worked up further this year, looking at how the frame could be occupied by all sorts of different uses, different activities, and that it isn't just to the side of a green space, that it really is an extension of that green space, and that feeling of nature in the city comes all the way through that frame. And this is an image, so a sketch visual inside the green heart, where you've got part of the frame there, but you've got a kind of really, I guess, a new green urban space there. And within the frame itself, there's opportunities for food growing, for kind of food initiatives. And this was all part of some of the partners that we were working with. So we are working with the Nottingham Wildlife Trust, the Good Food Partnership, and other local organisations that are very passionate about both wildlife, nature, and food production and growing in the city. And the idea that this green space would be, it would feel very green, but it would also have the capacity to host large events for the city as well. And that's where this combination of the frame and the green space together come in. And so there are challenges to how to achieve a space like this. How do you maintain it? How do you implement it? And the partners that we're working with are really instrumental in how to achieve something incrementally and think, what are the first steps we can make? So the first step is, the first move of this vision will be the green heart. That space is where the other side of the shopping centre has been demolished. And it's the size of a football pitch. It's comparable in size to Market Square, which is really the heart of the city, and that's a hardscaped space. There is kind of water in there as well, but there's not very much green in that space at all. So this is kind of in contrast to that, what we hope will be a very green urban space. And we're very excited to be working with Townsend landscape architects on the concept for the space. So they're really driving the concept through and taking that vision idea for a green space in the city and moving it forward. And working with them, we're exploring things like the character of the land itself. So the land has geological aspects to it. There's a sandstone cliff face that runs all the way through it. And that brings out ideas of what the planting could become. So thinking about rock gardens and the kinds of, I think it's a trailing snapdragon that's already growing in the sandstone there and that can survive there. So that, that's bringing out ideas of what the character of the planting should be. And then also in the name, Broad Marsh, the site used to be a marsh. There's a low-lying area to it. And that makes us think about where we can introduce water and think about capturing rainwater and having the marsh brought back to the city in somehow. So those are the kinds of ideas that we're thinking about to bring the concept alive of this green heart in the centre of the city. And then just finally today, so not only have we got the challenges of what to, how to bring forward the concept, but we've got the remnants of the demolition and some of the spoil and what we can do with that to create a really interesting space for the city. This is an image that's looking forward to the frame. And then just finally, I'll mention there's a little bit about Little Island. So this is a project that's recently been completed in New York. And it was a project where the client already had a vision for the site, but they felt it wasn't ambitious enough. So they launched a competition, and the client was a combination of a philanthropist and the Hudson Riverside Trust. So the philanthropist was responsible for funding the construction, but also funding 20 years worth of maintenance of the project. And the Hudson Riverside Trust are the people that will have the long-term stewardship of this park and maintain this park for many, many years. So they were really instrumental in raising the ambition, but also making sure that the vision was something that they were happy to pursue and maintain. And it's something that has all sorts of places for people, but wildlife as well. And all of the existing timber piers were retained. And yeah, this is just to kind of end on the little island and to show you how it's being used now. So I'll leave it there. I think that's my 20 minutes, and back over to you. I'll stop sharing now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was fantastic. We've had a couple of questions, so which we will pick up after our next two speakers. So we'll come to you in a sec. But thank you. That was fantastic. Next up, we hopefully have Simon Needle, who is principal, I've got to pronounce this correctly, Arboriculturist, I think, sorry, principal ecologist for Birmingham City Council. I've been worried about that all morning, Simon, and I've still managed to not get it right probably. Simon's been with the council for over 34 years, having worked in a number of roles from tree surgeon, park ranger, conservation and woodland manager, and in planning. Recent and current projects include developing Birmingham's Urban Forest Master Plan for 2021 to 2051, our Future City Plan, so City of Nature chapter, and leading on green-blue infrastructure for the city's net zero carbon plan. He's a former chair of the Wildlife Trust for Birmingham and the Black Country. He's also a founder member for Birmingham Tree People CIO, so the Tree Warden Group, and he's been involved in many local environmental community groups. So welcome, Simon, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. So yes, yeah, arboriculturist, it trips a lot of people up. So if you're not used to saying it. So yeah, thank you for having us, and it's great to get the opportunity to spread a little bit of the work that we're doing here in Birmingham. So yeah, as was mentioned there, this is looking at our Urban Forest Master Plan, which takes us from November last year, when it was adopted by council, through to 2051. So we're just going to run through a little bit of the process of thinking about the challenges that we're facing in Birmingham. So next slide, please. So I think we're all aware of the challenges that we face in terms of climate change. For Birmingham, these are no different in many respects to anywhere else, but we've got a population of 1.1 million and rising. We've got one of the youngest populations in Europe. We've got significant numbers of our awards in the top 10 percentile of indices multiple deprivation, where we've seen particularly high levels of years life lost in certain quarters. We have areas of high air pollution, areas with high urban heat island. We have issues with pluvial and fluvial flooding, and in that respect, it's quite interesting that when we see major flooding occurring in the UK, we see sites with helicopters flying over places like Somerset, which can get extensive flooding. But for an urban area like Birmingham, I think we actually, in one of the major floods we had the other year, we had more properties and people affected than places like Somerset. So the impacts are massive. They're just not necessarily as spectacular. It's very short-lived floodwater coming through people's properties and back out again. Things like we've got obviously big demand for housing. We've got a shortage of land within the city. We're very constrained by the boundaries that we have and being butted up against other urban authorities. The COVID-19 pandemic has obviously brought to the fore the inequality of accessible green space in Birmingham. So we know we have over 600 parks and green spaces across the city, but they're not necessarily well evenly distributed, especially not in terms of size and quality. So we need to be looking at that, about how that's sort of going to be dealt with going forward. And we know that our ethnic minority communities have been more impacted by that pandemic as well, not only through some of the aspects that public health are aware of, but also in terms of their access to things like green infrastructure and those other aspects of climate change as well. And this is where our liaison with other departments, such as public health, are critical for us in understanding those impacts and benefits that green space can have. Next slide, please. So within Birmingham, just like many other cities, we've got a huge number of drivers for change at the moment. Obviously, we've got things like the Environment Act that are pushing through with biodiversity net gain, mandate for that. We have our existing local plan, which is coming in for, well, it started like its 5-year review. So we'll be looking at how we're going to update that and implement those policy changes that we've seen through MPPF and through the Environment Act and incorporate those in the review. We're looking at how we revise our development management policies. We've done part of that. So that's strengthening our policy stance around green infrastructure. As Fiona mentioned there in the introduction, we've got what was our big city plan originally, which was looking at the core city centre area and about a development and regeneration strategy for sort of like 20 years. But we've sort of come to almost to the end of that now. So we're renewing that, but with a new focus on, we're calling our future city plan, and it's looking at that same city centre area, but extending out beyond what was the traditional typical boundary into the surrounding neighbourhoods. How can we spread that benefit? And within there, we've got a number of chapters, one of which is particularly around the natural environment, and it's called the City of Nature. We declared a climate change emergency in 2019 as well, and so with that comes, an understanding of the ecological emergencies that is out there. And we can go on with these. So we've got the Birmingham Design Guide, various master plans that we can see here. So Ray Valley Urban Quarter is right in the heart of the city centre. We've really sort of pushed the boat a little bit, I think, really on how we see green infrastructure being incorporated and delivered within that environment. It's got the river that flows through the heart of the city in there, the River Ray. It's not a major river, but it does bring significant issues in flooding. So looking to see how we can break out those channels and incorporate green infrastructure and trees as part of that. So lots of stuff going on there, lots of drivers for change. And all this has led really to, I suppose, us thinking about we need something that looks specifically at the management of our urban forests. So next slide, please. So yes, we decided we needed something that was overarching to bring all our policies and strategies together and look at that longer term vision for all of the trees within Birmingham. So we set out to produce an urban forest master plan for Birmingham. And we did this in partnership with a number of organisations, one of which was mentioned earlier, which is our Birmingham Tree People, our tree warden group. They actually were a key partner in this and a co-creator. We also worked with the Nature-Based Solutions Institute and Tree Economics in actually drawing up this document, and we engaged widely with our community groups on what actually we should be looking at, how we should be implementing it, looking at the quality of our existing urban forest and how we should be making improvements on that. So next slide, please. There's a little bit of debate at the moment, I suppose, and whether local authorities should have a tree strategy or a master plan or tree policies. We very much see that the urban forest master plan provides the destination of where we need to be by 2051, whereas things like tree strategies and policies are often the journey that you take, the influencing journey that you go. The Urban Forest Master Plan is very much around adaptive management as well. So looking at what do we have, what do we want, how do we get there, and most importantly, and I think this gets lost in a lot of strategies, is measuring how we are doing. And then understanding how you're doing gives you the information about what do you have, what do you want, and so on and so forth. I can't say that we did anything absolutely totally new. There's, in some respects, there's not much point in reinventing the wheel. So we did look at some of the work that had already been done by other people within the arboricultural industry around urban forest master planning, so that those sort of targets and categories there that we've got are the basis that we use to draw up our master plan. So we've divided these out into 3 different areas. So we've got trees and forests, community framework, and then resource management approach. And then under each one of those, there are a series of, I suppose, of key targets. There are, I think it's about 28 there on that list. We expanded slightly. I think we've brought it up to about 30, 32. So we've added a couple of extra into our urban forest management plan. And we'll just look at one example of that on the next slide, please. So this is an example just from within our master plan, and this was one that was something that we need to try and establish fairly early on, and that's looking at our tree canopy cover and understanding where do we need to get to, what have we got already, where is our urban tree canopy cover, what is our actual canopy cover as a percentage of our land area, where do we need to focus on. In doing that, we realized that actually we'd got some data on this, and we'd got several different sets of data, and other people had produced data on the canopy cover from Birmingham, but there was the way that these figures have been produced was not necessarily consistent. So we couldn't necessarily say, well, we're going to take this one or that one. So we had to decide that we were going to go for a set approach for the way that we in Birmingham are going to be managing our canopy cover going forward. So this is one of the actions that we've taken forward quite early on. So here we're looking, Birmingham is, you can see that little map there, there's different canopy covers there. We've decided we're going to go for a particular approach. So when we review this master plan over the coming months, we'll be able to actually set on there how we see we're performing against those performance indicators. So are we performing poorly? So we have low performance, moderate performance, good performance, or are we looking at optimal? So optimal there is, well, the low is looking at the existing canopy covers equals 0 to 25% of the potential, or optimal is the existing canopy cover equals 75 to 100% of the potential. I think it's interesting there as well, that the fact that we need to think about what our potential is for canopy cover. It's no good setting figures that we can't deliver because we don't have sufficient land area. So next slide, please. So in establishing our canopy cover levels in the city, we used data derived from the UK National Tree Map, from Blue Sky, and the land area as well. So we actually took the Ordnance Survey Green Space Master Map and have overlaid the two. We've gone through a process of actually factoring out areas of exclusion for potential canopy cover. So things like large water bodies, we've taken those out. Dedicated sporting areas, we've taken those out of the land area as well. So things like we've got the Warwickshire County Cricket Ground, the Blues and Aston Villa football grounds. Whatever you think about football, we're not going to be planting on those sports pitches. So we've taken those out of the areas. We've also taken things like the canals out as well. So there's a little bit of adjustment there in the total plantable area. And we've also removed some of our designated nature conservation sites as well. So things like triple SIs, where we have heathland and bog and fen sort of types of habitat, those priority habitats that we are not going to be planting up because we're protecting those for other biodiversity reasons. So overall, as a city, we're looking at something around 18.6% canopy cover by total area, but when we exclude some of those unplantable spaces, that increases to around the low 20s. But you can see that it's not evenly distributed across the city as well. So we've got areas of the city, if we're looking at that by that constituency map on the left, where in the north, we've got probably 49, maybe 50% canopy cover. And then in that central block, we're down in the sort of the tens, early teens. When we can look at this at a more finer grain as well. So we can move to wards. So we've got 10 constituencies, 69 wards in the city. And again, we can see that even in that area that was very high canopy cover levels, it's started to break down. That's not even across those areas. Next slide, please. But in terms of how this impacts on residents, we needed to come down even closer. So we've actually broken this down into the lower super output areas as well. So we've got 639 lower super output areas across the city, and that's equivalent to about 1,500 residents, 650 households. And you can see again there that it's even finer grained now. We can really target in on those areas that have low canopy cover. But that's just one aspect, isn't it? That's look at understanding what we've got from our tree canopy cover, but how is that impacting and how is that relating to the citizens of Birmingham? So next slide, please. So this is where we worked with, again, Birmingham Tree People. They were able to access some grant funding that allowed us to co-develop or to procure a license and co-develop this, what we've called our priority planting platform. But it effectively works a bit like a tree equity assessment as well. So if you've not heard of tree equity, there's a lot of work being done on that in the United States by people like American Forests, and this is looking at giving a score to particular neighbourhoods based on a whole range of factors, which includes climate-based factors as well as the numbers of trees in a given area. So here we were able to take our canopy cover assessment and we were able to overlay with our plantable space. So both what is the total plantable space available to us, how much of that is impermeable, so we can look at the impermeable spaces, but we've also taken data on air quality, urban heat island, the stormwater flooding, so the risk maps on there, and we've also included the indices of multiple deprivation as well. Using the little sliders that are down the left-hand menu there, we can give a weighting as to what our priorities might be. So we're always going to be looking at areas with low canopy cover as a priority for urban tree planting, but we might be looking at how we can best tackle air quality or urban heat islands. We might also want to factor in what people's living environments like, or we might want to tie into some of the health factors or any of those types of measures there. And when we do that, we get this multicolored map that comes up showing the areas that are green as being, I suppose, of least suitability. So they have they're areas that aren't impacted heavily by the factors that we've dialed in, and those moving through to red, which are the most impacted by those factors that we've dialed in, so making them most suitable to look at using green infrastructure to try and tackle some of those issues. So again, this sort of doubles as a climate vulnerability risk mapping and a way of us prioritizing trees for climate adaptation and action. And there we can see I've picked out one of the low super output areas in the city that, with the factors that we've placed there, that's come out as being the most impacted of all of those wards. And like I say, we can select those by suitability, so we can focus on those that are just most impacted, and that's where that little sort of suitability slider comes across there in that bottom left-hand corner. So next slide, please. So while we're seeing a lot of local authorities and a lot of drive from organisations and governments, organisations and the government to plant woodlands as a way of dealing with carbon sequestration, adding biodiversity, dealing with other climate-based factors. For us in a highly urban area, it's those individual trees that are going to be that integral and crucial part of the mix. And that is where this platform allows us to sort of be able to focus in quite down. We can zoom in on that map, looking at that prioritization area and overlaying it over the aerial map, so we can highlight those areas where we think we can get trees in. For us, you know, it's probably not that we are going to be able to plant thousands of trees in one location, but we are probably going to plant a few trees in thousands of locations. And by doing that, we're able to bring the benefits of biodiversity, ecosystem services, that climate adaptation to the doorstep of our residents, rather than providing some kind of benefit, you know, on the periphery of the city. When we're looking at tree species, though, obviously we're talking about climate change as well. And so what are the best tree species that we can use in these areas? while in some of our sites where we've got high nature conservation value, we might be looking at particularly use of the native species. When we get out into these urban areas, these built environments, we can consider a much broader range of species, and we're probably looking to be planting more of the non-native species through here, just as part of our process of resilience building. So next slide, please. And coming on to that, so we know that, you know, at the moment there are a number of pests and diseases out there which potentially threaten significant numbers of trees. So with ash dieback, we were, hopefully most of us are aware that that was sort of first picked up in I think it's like 2012, I think it wasn't it. It's been spreading across the UK. Significant numbers of ash trees are being lost from the landscape. There was at first thought that it's going to be probably 90+% of all ash trees in the UK lost. So we'd be looking at something on the same sort of scales as the Dutch elm disease that was spread through the UK in the 70s, with that massive loss of you know, magnificent trees from the landscape. And if you're in an urban area and you're relying on trees delivering ecosystem services benefits to your residents, there's a real risk that if your tree stock is heavily reliant on one or two particular species or family groups, that if a new pest or disease comes in, that we may lose all of those trees. And in terms of replacing those benefits, you could be looking at anything from 30 to 80 years plus to get back the benefits of those lost. So understanding how your urban forest is composed of trees, family groupings, genus and species, is crucial to understanding what you need to be planting going forward, so that you don't become over reliant on any one particular group of those. So here we've got some data. This is just showing from our highways trees at the moment, but from there we're able to see, you know, do we have any particular family groups that are overrepresented? Typically we'd be seeing things like Rosaceae or Tiliaceae or Aceraceae, so those limes, the planes, the sycamores, and in Rosaceae, gosh, there's huge amounts there. That's all the rowans, all the white beams, the cherries, the apples, the pears, you know, it's a huge amount. So if something was to come along and affect one of those particular family groupings or one of those genus, we could stand to lose a significant number of trees. So we're looking at how we can balance that out. In the arboriculture world, there's a general sort of understanding that, you know, a balance of about no more than 30% of a family, 20% of a genus, or 10% of a species is a good sort of compromise to try and think about balancing that off. So yeah, I think in Birmingham at the moment, I think we're just about okay in terms of that family balance. We do know that in terms of the genus, we're sort of right on the tip there. So within the highways trees there, you might be able to see on the slide that Tilia as a genus is about 27%, I think that is, of our tree species. So that has tipped over that 20% balance, and that's something that we're trying to work through there. How are we replacing those trees? What else can we look for that might take up the place of those trees going forward? So as we're having that programme, understanding what we're using, understanding how that's changing that balance is crucial. Next slide, please. The final bit, I suppose, of this is about how we also convey messages to other groups, to our elected members, about the benefits of tree planting, and then how we can help secure budget for tree planting. On its own, we might not necessarily be able to secure significant budget to do tree planting activities across the city, but by linking into the range of different aspects that the city is working on, and other organisations are working on, we're able to hopefully access a much wider budget. So here we've got those same lower super areas. We've factored in whether we want to look at a percentage canopy cover increase or a buyer percentage. We're able to factor in some mortality and average tree sizes. And out from there, because the data is able to look at what the plantable space is and what our increase is, it's going to tell us how many trees we need to plant to meet that target. And then it's also it gives us, using the iTree ecosystem services algorithms, it gives us a current carbon benefit, monetary benefit from the existing tree stock, but then what's modelled in terms of what that would look like when we add those trees. And so we can also see the net increase in sort of carbon sequestration. So a financial value for that, but also the numbers of kilos sequestered. We can also do that for looking at air quality and water interception as well. So tying this in not only to biodiversity, but to climate change, adaptation, so the health and well-being benefits that it's going to bring, tying it into flood risk, minimizing flood risk, tying it into carbon sequestration, so aiding the city's carbon net zero program is all sort of part and parcel of this process. And that's, I suppose, a way of making it everybody's responsibility at the same time, to sort of consider how we treat our trees and how we're replacing those. So that's a little sort of a run through what we're doing on our urban forest master plan at the moment. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Simon. That was really interesting, and a few questions are coming in, so we will pick those up. And again, okay, in the audience, please do keep asking questions of our panelists.
No, so thank you.
Third and final speaker is Dr. Emilie Wadsworth, who is Operations Director at the Green Action Trust. Emilie has worked in the environmental sector for approaching 20 years, spending the last 17 of those with the Green Action Trust. Since becoming Operations Director, she's led on the Trust Strategy and Development Team. So she's led the Trust Strategy and Development Team, managing the policy and business development activity and having overall responsibility for the development and delivery of 4 major initiatives, including the Central Scotland Green Network, Europe's largest green infrastructure project, and the 10,000 Rain Gardens for Scotland programme, climate adaptation initiative using nature-based solutions. So welcome, Emilie, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and well done for getting all of those words out. They were hard enough to type, so never mind to see. Thank you for inviting me along this afternoon now to talk about the Central Scotland Green Network. It's been something that we've been working on for about 12 years now, so it's quite exciting to start getting it back out there and talking to a new audience about. Next slide, please. So I'm based in Scotland, and it's very chilly up here, so hello from a very chilly Fife. I don't know how many of you will be aware of what the Green Action Trust are and who we are, so I thought a very quick overview. We are an environmental regeneration charity that covers the whole of Scotland. We've had various guises over the last 36 years, but our primary aim is to deliver social, economic and health benefits by environmental action. We target our work in the most disadvantaged areas, so primarily within the central belt of Scotland, but pretty much anywhere where we need it. We have several key programmes and a whole suite of different projects that we deliver. The Central Scotland Green Network is one of the longest running and certainly the biggest profile one that we've been working on recently. I'm going to talk to you quite a lot about the CSGN, about what it is, a bit of a potted history, where it came from and where we're hoping to go next, and illustrate the delivery of the CSGN using a handful of short projects towards the end. Next slide, please. So Central Scotland Green Network is it's a planning initiative, actually. It was first instilled in National Planning Framework 2 back in 2010 as a wouldn't the Central Scotland Green Network be a good thing? And everybody said yes. The Scottish Government tasked ourselves and Forestry Commission Scotland, Scottish Natural Heritage as they were then, to basically go away and do a lot of engagement and find out what on earth the CSGN could be. And at the end of about 2 years worth of consultation and engagement and head scratching, we came up with this vision, and that by 2050, Central Scotland had been transformed into a place where the environment adds value to the economy and where people's lives are enriched. The map that you can see on the slide is the boundary that we came up with for the CSGN, and we'll talk a little bit about how we came up with that in the few slides time. It looks like quite a big area, but it's actually only about 12% of Scotland's land mass. However, 70% of our population live in that area. So it's incredibly densely populated. Obviously, that's nothing compared to Birmingham. It's only about 3.8 million people, but it is 19 local authorities. and it covers the big cities, Edinburgh, Glasgow, as well as Stirling. So it's a pretty big place. You could probably take about 3 hours to drive from one side of it to the next, providing the motorways were kind to you. But that's it's where about 65% or so of Scotland's gross value added is. It's say 70% of the population, and it's where there's a significant post-industrial legacy of deprivation. I'm also going to apologise now. A fly decides to have started to just fly around here, and I've got a spaniel just next to me. So if something goes falling over in the moment, it's because she's decided to try and catch a fly. So apologies. Next slide, please. So the Central Scotland Green Network was a Scottish Government initiative in 2010. They set it up in National Planning Framework 2. It has been replicated in the subsequent national planning frameworks, including the framework NPF4, which was just ratified or laid before Parliament about 3 weeks ago. It's also been name checked and funded through various programmes for government over the years. It's driven by Scottish Government. They have a task force within the organisation, with the government that oversee it. And there is large amounts of support through sponsorship, funding, through participation of staff, be it through civil servants in government itself or through the agencies, and also through policy drivers that support the CSGN be delivered. In 2014, which coincided with NPF3 being produced, the Central Scotland Green Network Trust was established. That is now Green Action Trust. We just changed our name a couple of years ago. And it was our job to drive forward the delivery of the CSGN and to coordinate partners. Next slide, please. A lot of partners go into delivering the CSGN. It's not something that the Green Action Trust or the Central Scotland, the Scottish Government can do on their own. A lot of partners are knowingly involved in delivering all aspects of CSGN, but there are also an awful lot of partners that are doing CSGN related projects that perhaps are not aware of it. So one of our roles is to continue raising awareness of the CSGN and how people are supporting to deliver it. And this is just a snapshot of the partners who are involved in the governance of the CSGN. Next slide, please. So back in about, well, this is a 1947 map of the collieries in central belt of Scotland. It was the heart of Scotland's industrial revolution. It's where we had an awful lot of coal mining, oil shale mining, and all the associated works with go through that. This map just shows where the majority of the mines are situated in Scotland. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, as we all know, the Industrial Revolution did crash, and we've now been left with a lot of dereliction in that central belt. This map shows the vacant and derelict land sites from 2014. I'm showing you the map from 2014 because this is the justification of why we came up with the CSGN boundary. The impact of this dereliction on people's lives is significant. I think this is 82% of Scotland's vacant and derelict land sites were within this area, and they've blighted the economy and people's lives within that area, resulting in the next map. So next slide, please. And this is the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. And this just shows the red ones are basically the lowest 15% of data zones. 80% of those data zones are within the CSGN area. So those three maps combined with existing planning authority boundaries is why we came up with this area to focus the actions of the CSGN on. Next slide, please. So alongside all of that consultation and the mapping and the rest of the work, we did a lot of work with partners and communities and a whole range of stakeholders to find out, well, what does the vision actually mean? How are we going to deliver that vision? And we came up with 5 place themes. These have changed a little bit over the years as the policy framework that the CSGN sits in changes. I'll try and show that over the next few slides about how they relate to what we have now. But basically, these were 5 themes that allowed us to deliver place change. So vacant, the growth had things like the remediation of the vacant derelict land for economic purposes, skills and education. place for balance was around climate change adaptation and mitigation, and also carbon sequestration. A place to feel good included actions around stronger communities, around recreation, and around about health and well-being. A place to belong was community empowerment, community wealth building, those kind of things. And a place for nature covered species and landscape protection and enhancement. Next slide, please. 2014 came along, and so did the National Planning Framework 3. The Scottish Government took all the slides that I've basically shown you and said, yes, this sounds like a good thing. We will now add CSGN as a national development within NPF3. That gives it a status, and that all planning authorities that sit within that boundary have a duty to deliver it. So it's going to be delivered in partnership by planning authorities and by lots of different people. However, they also requested that Central Scotland Green Network Trust, as we became at that point, took on some very specific priorities. Those were priorities that they identified as not being delivered by other people or by the existing policy framework the Scottish Government had. And that was to ensure quality local environments were being delivered by addressing vacant and derelict land, particularly in disadvantaged areas. We were tasked to focus on natural climate solutions, the whole blue-green cities approach, but also greening of active travel, food growing, creation of woodlands, forests, and peatland restoration. But we also had to look at network connections and ensuring that wildlife and people were brought together. Next slide, please. The fact that this conference was delayed by a wee while has meant that I've been able to add this slide in, because up until the 8th of November, National Planning Framework 4 was just a consultative draft. It has now been laid before Parliament, and this allows me to say, well, Central Scotland Green Network has been continued as a national development within NPF4. We have also been asked to prioritise action around accelerating green infrastructure and urban greening to address the climate and the biodiversity crises. We've also been asked to continue to concentrate on vacant derelict land and to focus on woodland creation in the right area. I could talk a lot about that as an ecologist going forward. It sits within the Delivering Livable Places theme, which focuses on restoring nature at scale, the nature networks kind of concept, delivering exemplar green infrastructures and producing benefits for communities, be them social, but also economic. Next slide, please. That vision and those place themes are massive. There's an awful lot going on there. And so as an attempt to try and make it a bit more tangible and work out what we can do in order to make sure that we get to that 2050 vision in 2050, we've created a series of interim delivery plans. The one we're working on at the moment is Delivery Plan 2030, commonly known as DP30. This basically says, where do we need to be by 2030 in order to be where we want to be in 2050? We've taken those place themes that I've spoken about and split them down into these 4 new themes. This is to link with the various policies that have been coming out since 2014, when we first published the place themes. We're now looking at biodiversity and ecological coherence, supporting environmental improvements in disadvantaged areas, greening of active travel and green infrastructure, which does include blue. Very important to say, it does include blue. We've got those green, so the greyed out things are there about the roles that Green Action Trust need to take in raising awareness of the CSGN. I mentioned at the start that there's a whole load of people out there doing projects that are delivering the CSGN, but don't know about it. So as part of our job is to help understand what else is going on there and support people to realise that what they're doing is contributing to a larger thing. We also need to maintain a supportive environment for CSGN through funding, through resourcing, through policy frameworks. And we also have a role to coordinate CSGN partner activities to make sure that multifunctionality is being delivered as standard. Next slide, please. One of the best ways of doing this is to deliver the scale of change at landscape. There's the projects we have on here are large scale, often lottery funded type landscape partnerships that are delivering CSGN aims. We as a trust are supporting them through a variety of different ways, but they are also all delivering the CSGN. I'm going to take the Leaving programme, that one down on the bottom right hand side there, and talk to you a little bit about what's happening on the ground, definitely there, and then follow it up with a couple of smaller scale projects. We've got the boring dry stuff out of the way. Next slide, please. So the Leaving programme, so this is a highly deprived area in southwest Fife, so just over the further forth from Edinburgh. It's the Leaving programme is a SEPA, Scottish Environment Protection Agency led concept about delivering environmental change across the whole of the river catchment. They came from it from a we need to restore the river point of view, and realised that the dense population meant that they couldn't do it in the way they normally do, and that they needed to create a genuine placemaking project. We're in year 4 of it now, and we have a master plan that's been produced, a snapshot of which is seen on the screen here, that will allow us to create significant economic and social regeneration and environmental regeneration in the area, should we be able to get all the funding together for it, which we're working on. A large part of it has been made possible because a new rail link is being put in along the river, and that has brought with it significant SOSTRANS funding to allow us to look at doing green active travel routes that connect the communities into the new railway stations and along the river with it. Rather than just putting in routes, SOSTRANS have realised that this is a very significantly different project to what they can do, and the impact that it could have is beyond anything they've funded before. They are supporting us to also create the green and blue infrastructure around those networks, combined with lottery funding to look at heritage and community engagement and empowerment. We have a 10-year programme for this to deliver it, which will hopefully result in about £32 million worth of regeneration area across that particular bit of the Leaving there. It's about a 4-kilometre stretch of the river. That's a fairly major CSGN flagship project. If all goes according to plan, it will not just regenerate vacant and derelict land, it will be putting environmental improvements into significantly disadvantaged areas. It will create jobs, skills and training opportunities. It will be, there's going to be outdoor education put in there, green active travel, rain gardens, water management, and habitat restoration and creation as well. So it's ticking all of the major boxes for the CSGN. So a massive flagship project. Next slide, please. On a slightly smaller scale, all projects that deliver some form of green infrastructure will also be delivering the CSGN. So the next 2 slides, just to highlight a couple of the small projects that Green Action Trust ourselves have delivered to support the local authorities. This particular one is a site that Falkirk Council own. It's a vacant and derelict land site, an old coal bin, which had basically been fallen into disrepair. We spent the last 12 years working with the council and other partners to develop the whole scale regeneration of the project. We've had to do it in phases because that's the way the funding has worked, but we've been able to create a truly multifunctional, socially accessible, environmentally friendly space, which, as Simon touched on earlier, the impacts the pandemic has had on populations in urban areas and peri-urban areas, the lack of green space and accessibility to green space was really highlighted. We've been able to help address that in quite a deprived area of Falkirk. Hopefully when you get a copy of the slides, that link will work, and that link will take you to a little video of the site as it's just been opened. It was completed about 6 weeks ago, so it's well worth having a look at the video. Next slide, please. The last one I want to talk about is a project called Carton Kittock. So I was quite interested listening to what Simon was talking about in the mapping and the carbon woodland and things. So the Clyde Climate Forest is an initiative that's been working across the greater Glasgow and Clyde area that looks at creating or planting trees in urban areas, but also woodlands in peri-urban and rural areas to increase the connectivity, the canopy and the carbon sequestration of the area. This is one project that was delivered under the Clyde Climate Forest last year, and it's a large site on the edge of Glasgow that we were able to create Glasgow Children's Wood in, where all 151 primary schools in Glasgow had acorns, grew some oak trees and then came out on a site and planted them all over a case of about 4 days. It was chaos, but we've been able to create a 31 hectare woodland that is now fully accessible by all of Glasgow's primary schools. And I think I'm rapidly running out of time, so the last slide should be the last slide. And I'll just say thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you ever so much, Emilie. If you would keep your camera on, that would be fantastic. And if I could invite Lisa and Simon to put theirs on as well, please. And we've got a bit of time for some questions and discussion, hopefully. So hopefully, I can't see Simon, but hopefully there he is. Sorry. Please, could we take the slide down, Sally, just so I can see the fab. Thank you ever so much. So I will kick off first, if it's all right with you. Lisa, we've had some questions which I've now lost on my screen about your presentation. So I'll kick off with those first, if that's all right, and then we'll have some more general ones. But I just wanted to pick up some of the sort of specific ones about the schemes people were talking about. So we've had a question about the ownership of the site in Nottingham and whether that was a challenge. And then also picking up on some of the discussion from the first session around the sort of value and importance of play space within schemes. And so there was a question about whether that was incorporated into the Nottingham Centre design as well. So if you would pick up those first, please.
So with land ownership, it is majority council owned, but there are a couple of outstanding ownerships. And so the council have got ongoing discussions with those landowners. And I think, I guess this is one of the roles a vision can play. With the absence of a vision, it's difficult for those owners to understand what they could be part of. Whereas now there's a different kind of dialogue happening with them now to see, right, how could they become part of the vision? What could they do? What will they be? So one of them is in an area where there's workspace proposed. Another one is where it stitches more into the broad marsh. And so those conversations are now different. Now there's a vision in place. And I guess that's also I guess the aspect of a vision is it's not set in stone, it's not fixed. So depending on how those conversations go, it can be they can be incorporated into the vision. And that's, I think, how the council wants to move forward, is to make sure that those partners come on board rather than become separate. And I think there's enough in the vision for them to feel like they can be part of that. And the question around play space. So I think the evolving design for the Green Square, where we're working with Townsend landscape architects, the idea that play can happen there is absolutely what we would like, but we're not looking at a designated play space in any way, shape or form. So it's more like incorporating play into the design, but not in a really explicit way. And I think that's what we would like, so that this feels like a green space for everyone. But just thinking about the sandstone, the castle rock, the idea of large rocks that people can climb over, that in a way could have a play element without it being specifically play. So I think we really want to achieve that feel of people being able to be playful there without a designated area, if that makes sense. So we kind of build it into the design.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And then just one more for you for now, Lisa. I know you touched on the long-term stewardship of the park in New York, and of course it partly relates to ownership, but could you talk a little bit about the sort of long-term stewardship plans for Nottingham?
So I guess the vision involves a larger site than just the green space itself. So there will be plots coming forward that will be developed for housing, for workspace, and so those will have their own kind of journey. But all of the kind of green spaces that tie those together, those will be those are council spaces. But I think the way that the designs want to be evolved with partners like the Nottingham Wildlife Trust and in the Broad Marsh, where hopefully there will be lots of local businesses within there, that there's an element of ownership beyond just the council and an interest to take care and an interest in the green spaces beyond just council maintenance. That's the idea. And I think that's where if if the right kind of mix of activities are brought in and local businesses, then the hope is that there is more sense of ownership over those spaces as well, and a shared interest in maintaining them. And that interest in maintenance can also come from activities and programs that involve community groups around the city. And I think also that the type of planting and landscape that we choose there is critical, so that it has a long-term viability in its maintenance. So thinking about low maintenance planting selections as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And Simon, I noticed that for those of you who are keeping an eye on the Q&A, you might have seen Simon's been busily answering some of the questions in writing, but I do want to pick up a couple of them because I think they will be on people's minds. I know you mentioned that you do use non-native trees as part of your planting, and I can appreciate some people will feel that's quite controversial. So I just wondered if you might just explain a little bit more about that and pick up the point that somebody did raise around the sort of link to then native wildlife and the pressure around nature recovery.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point. I mean, we know that, you know, from the experience we're seeing with climate change at the moment, that some of our native species are not going to be able to cope with the climates that we are seeing coming forward. We're going to see a contraction of the range of some of those species. You know, as we see prolonged drier spells, torrential rain, they're not necessarily all going to be coping with those. There's an element, I suppose, of thinking about where we're sourcing our next generation of tree stock from. We can still look to use native tree species, but maybe source seed from trees of the same species and genus, but from maybe say 5 degrees south where we are. So those sort of mid-French latitudes, they might have a bit more inbuilt genetic resilience to some of the climate change impacts that we're seeing. But I think, yes, we do need to be looking at what else we can plant. I think, you know, we can be careful about that non-native selection. We do need to be mindful of the fact that some of these could be invasive in our natural environment. So, you know, we would guard against planting certain species adjoining our high quality nature conservation areas. And definitely within those areas, we're not going to be advocating that we plant non-native species. But located well away from those, I think we've got the opportunity in terms of trees that have suitable flowering, suitable fruit production. So I mean, anything really with catkins early in the season is providing a pollen resource for early pollinators. You know, single flowered species are going to be more beneficial for our native species than double flowered. And some of those, I mean, admittedly, you know, the shape of the flowers is not necessarily going to be great for some species. But I think within, you know, if we look at the trees within Rosaceae, there are trees around the world that are in the same family that will still benefit, the fruiting the same. Yeah, so it's not going to be we're ignoring all natives. It is about picking the right one for the right location. And yeah, putting that in context with our local nature recovery network. And I think, as I said in the text there, even if they don't necessarily have that direct fruit or flowering sort of benefit, they can still help create that corridor for movement between the higher value sites as well, providing that bit of cover the stepping stone sites. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Emilie, is that something that you're having to think about in Scotland as well?
Very much so, though I suppose we have a little bit of an advantage in that we've got quite a large country just to the south of us that technically has the same native species. So there are some things like the plane tree was a good example you'd mentioned, Simon. That's not commonly found in Scotland, but could easily find its way here quite naturally because we're connected. And so technically that would still be native, or at least naturalized to a point. And we could cope with it. So yeah, a lot of the ecology, I'm an ecologist by trade, and a lot of the purist ecologists are even struggling with the idea of beech and sycamore being planted instead of ash. But just because, you know, we take a standpoint of saying 10,000 years ago, not native, they would have found their way here anyway.
Thank you. And Simon, just back to you. We've had a question around the sort of challenge of siloing different types of green infrastructure. And I know you have focused on your forest master plan, but that's not the only sort of vision you have is in Birmingham. So I just wondered if you wanted to actually sort of make that wider link.
Yeah, thanks. So yes, I mean, I think I sit in a fortunate position that, I mean, I've worked in a number of different departments or directorates for the city over the years, so I have got those linkages out into there. I am also ecologist and arboriculturist, so I have to cover both disciplines. And so linking across into biodiversity again is one aspect of those. But we've been going through a Future Parks Accelerator, as have some other cities around the UK over the past couple of years, and that has been a very much multidisciplinary approach, working with highways, working with public health, working with education, the children's trusts, all of those groups to try and emphasise the value and benefit of green spaces for the health and well-being. So we're pushing that agenda quite strongly. Obviously, in terms of our work on biodiversity nature recovery networks and how we can improve some of our corridor sites, we're delivering biodiversity interventions in those river corridors. But at the same time, in renaturalising those channels for biodiversity, we're providing flood alleviation measures as well. So that ties us in really well with our flood risk teams, which are in our highway section. And again, that cross-working, that when they're going to be delivering something, they realise that they can be delivering benefits for us at the same time as well. So it's really starting to build, and I think there's been a lot more emphasis over the past couple of years, and I think our City of Nature 25-year plan that we've just adopted, that sort of starts to really bring all of that cross-working and sort of helps to break down those silos a bit more. It does require, though, capacity internally to the city to carry that forward, which is a big task that we have to pick up now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Lisa, that's something that you touched on with some of the other schemes you were talking about around that multiple benefits and flood risk alleviation and things. And you very much having to see that sort of trying to not focus on silos and think about the multiple benefits, or is that a sort of occasionally?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also where you get the benefits of those kinds of initiatives with larger scale sites as well. So when you're kind of limited to the plot boundary of a building, it's very difficult to try and make those moves. But when you have larger scale sites, so like Broadmarsh, where you're looking at more of a sort of more urban scale, or with Google, it was a very large site in California, you can start to make those you can start to achieve those kinds of initiatives and bring in more things like the rainwater management. Just one point on play again, sorry, I just realised one aspect of Broadmarsh which I didn't mention is, so just to the south of the site, the council has just completed a new library, and I think it has the largest children's library in the UK now. So the Collins Street that connects to the green space, the Green Heart and Leicester Square, is where the children's library will open out to. So there is more kind of dedicated play there, you could say, that then will bleed into the Green Heart. And that was one of the things that allowed us to go, okay, so it might not absolutely be in the Green Heart because there's that aspect relating to the children's library there. Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
No, that's really helpful, thank you. And one thing, again, I think for all of you, one of the earliest speakers, Alistair, in the first session, I think sort of was reflecting on the fact that occasionally there's a risk that green infrastructure, because of the multiple benefits it provides, falls between the cracks of policy. So, it might be seen as a priority for health and well-being, but not really translated into people that can then help deliver it, or it might be an environmental priority, but not being given enough priority because it's not being funded by the right team. Do you think, in your experience and the schemes you've talked about, but also your wider experience, do you think that's fair? Or do you think actually if there's just local leadership and willingness and vision, it sort of doesn't matter where it sits in which policies? Simon, can I ask you first?
I didn't know you were going to come to me first. Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that risk, and we have seen that it certainly, if we don't have that capacity internally to carry on those conversations, to build those conversations, there is a risk that somebody will go off and start to do something, but not necessarily see the cross benefits. I think for us, being able to get the data in forms that are visible, that I think people understand. It's all very well sometimes trying to articulate this in words, but actually a picture paints 1,000 words. And what we've been doing, it has been useful to present that data to a number of different people, our cabinet members, our councillors, and it sort of paints a picture a bit clearer. And I think they, certainly some of our other colleagues in other directorates start to understand how that can cross over, how we can benefit, how they can benefit us and we can benefit them. So yes, I think it's local leadership, but I think, yes, there is also that risk if you don't have that capacity or something happens that you could lose that multiple benefit.
Thank you. And Emilie, what are your reflections? Obviously, you've got your vision in, or at least in national policy, which I'm sure many of the audience who are in other nations might be quite envious of.
Yeah, I can't deny that a Scottish government initiative in national planning isn't a benefit. It absolutely is. There's local leadership as well as regional national leadership is absolutely key. And I'm sure that there are some of those local authorities within our 19 that were already doing green network policies and were already incorporated blue-green infrastructure into everything they did. But for those that didn't have planners with that kind of experience or knowledge, they would have lagged behind had they not had this sort of stick from Scottish government. But that stick also comes with carrots and has to come with carrots. And you need to have the support and the guidance to allow the planners and the people writing the local development plans and supplementary planning guidance know what to put in it. So you need the local leadership, you need the national leadership, you need the carrots and the stick. Simon's point about data is absolutely key as well. And having really good examples of what's been done. Traction for the CSGN took a long time to get going until we could actually point to some brilliant multifunctional case studies that had trees and suds and rain gardens and all that kind of stuff in it as well. So you really do need some good examples to be able to showcase, to show that it can be done. I'm not quite sure how similar this is in England, but in Scotland we tend to go, oh, it won't be done here, won't work here. So we have to show people that it will. And resourcing, but that's the only thing I'm going to mention about resourcing.
No, but it's important. Of course, it's hugely important.
You can be creative. So you mentioned earlier about sort of health and well-being and things. Bringing together pots of funding for those different themes can basically add value to each other and make something bigger and better.
Absolutely. And Lisa, what are your thoughts on potential?
Well, I suppose I'd try and look at that question from an architect's perspective, and I can definitely see how it is at risk of falling through the gaps. But if I think of our experience in Nottingham, so there, the aspiration for the city to be carbon neutral, it had already kind of set itself a target of becoming, of having a green future, and then what is the vision of that green future and how does it manifest itself? It helps us tie the landscape story to that, and it helps bring it to life somehow. So not necessarily in a technical way, but in a visual way. It's like this has to be part of how the city will look like in the future. And I think there's so many ways that landscape can be, the sort of the green agenda can be. There's so many benefits to it, from health, from carbon, from well-being, from so many different, from biodiversity, so many different angles. But it feels like now it should become the starting point of the story of how the design evolves. Like just thinking about what we're doing with the green space, we're thinking about the underlying land. What is it? It's just like it's the absolute starting point. And I've definitely experienced it where it has been it's an extra, and that just can't be the way it is now. So it has to be at front and center of how the design starts, and I think that's what we're trying to do in Nottingham. Absolutely.
Thank you. And Lisa, what I found really interesting about your presentation was the fact that actually, or as you say, well, Nottingham is really ambitious about net zero, and that's a really important driver. You also talked about the Nottingham Board for Culture and Creativity, and that cultural sort of starting point. Do you feel that while that came from a slightly different sector, arguably, do you think that they were really on board with pushing the multiple benefits of green infrastructure, or do you think that might have come from a slightly
totally and I think that's yeah, and I think that's this thing, of not thinking too much in silos and thinking about how there is such a wide appreciation and support for it. So the culture board, we're really trying to think about what do we want our city to be like in 10 years time? What do we want it to feel like? What are we desperately missing? How do we want to spend time in the city? And green spaces were what people wanted. And then now thinking about people spending more time outdoor space, what's the opportunity for creativity in those spaces? What can what activities can happen there, and is there space for storytelling through sculpture or through plinths or all sorts of things in landscape. And so we've found that some really exciting creative conversations from artists in the city, galleries, all sorts of groups that want to do things in outdoor spaces. And then when they see the possibility of a new green space, they go, oh, this is how we could do what we do here. So just that, more green space allows other creative activities to happen outdoors, let alone it just being, for green space for people. It's like people then see how they can use it differently. And that's what we could definitely see from the culture board, from how they responded to it, and how it was a real kind of like #1 priority.
Yeah, wow, thank you. Now, Simon, I know you just mentioned data, so I do want to come back to that, because I know, and again, I know you have very kindly typed some answers, but somebody asked about, if they were thinking of carrying a similar exercise. Obviously, research and mapping is a hugely important sort of starting point to know what you've got, and we've just touched on resources within local authorities. So somebody did ask, and you've obviously shared to an extent, so I don't feel too bad asking you to share it again, but just about the budget for this sort of, to try and get that data to as you sell, paint a picture and sell to decision makers.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I have put in there that we were, it was actually again, our tree warden group were the ones who actually came to the council with the ask. I mean, I could have asked until I was probably blue in the face to get the budget, but coming from a third party organisation, that they came and asked if they was set the case that we needed an urban forest master plan. It was actually a final recommendation in a tree policy review that we'd been working through over the past few years. So we secured a 20k budget for that, which to somebody like me who has to have done lots of things with virtually nothing for 70 years, that's an awful lot of money. But so that paid for covering the costs of providing a number of workshops, engaging with those external consultants. They actually put they put the pen to the paper with all our discussion. We utilise data that we already held, so we do hold the data from the National Tree Map, which we have on an annual fee, but we use that for our planning work anyway, so we already held that. Our flooding data came from the risk from our flood risk team. The air quality data came from the university, so that didn't cost us anything because we're working in partnership with them. The indices multiple deprivation, that's all freely available from Office of National Statistics. So a lot of the data we were inputting into there was good. We have quite good data on the trees that we already manage. We've got a good GIS-based system. So data around highways trees, tree species composition, where they're located, the parks trees, we have that. We do have more data together. We don't really have an awful lot of data about the trees that are on private land. So this coming year, we're going to be doing an iTree Eco survey, which will hopefully give us a bit more information about that. That is funded through a partnership bid. We went with the Combined Authority. They submitted the bid to Woodland Trust for the Emergency Tree Fund, so it's being funded through there. The Black Country authorities did their iTree Eco survey last year, which our tree warden group helped deliver. So we're just going to roll this out. So in fact, the whole of the Combined Authority will have an iTree Eco survey. So that'll be 7 local authorities all in one big block. So probably one of the biggest surveys in the UK, I think, when we're done.
Imagine, thank you. And Lisa, sort of related to that, but on that wider point around mapping and data, is there a comprehension of how your new scheme fits into that wider network of green infrastructure within the Nottingham city centre?
So I think some of the work we're doing with Townsend landscape architects is looking at the existing green spaces in and around the city and the blue spaces, so the river, the canal, and trying to connect in a way green corridors for. We had this kind of debate: is this a green corridor for wildlife or is it for people? Which one is it? Because people can move in straight lines, wildlife will do what you want. And so in a way, we're absolutely trying not to think about this space in isolation. It's how it adds to the network. And also because what the Broadmarsh had done in the city was blocked many old streets through the city. It had sort of terminated a whole load of existing streets and created one large mass, like a big full stop. And so by opening it up and creating and making those connections again, that allows us to think about not just the green space, but kind of green corridors that then connect out to wider spaces. So closest is the Castle Green, but then to the south, you've got the meadows, you've got St Anne's, you've got the Arboretum, and all sorts of wider spaces, and just thinking about those green routes. So absolutely trying to think about it in a wider context.
Great, thank you very much. I'm conscious that we have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to ask one final question of all of our panel members, and then I will wrap up and let people get away and have some lunch, hopefully. So final question. Obviously, it's been really interesting to hear about all 3 of the schemes in this session, and I just want to ask if there's one key message or key lesson that you would share with others who are aspiring to secure green and blue infrastructure with multiple benefits in either their local area or region or indeed whole country. What would your key sort of takeaway from your experience be, or bit of advice? So I've come Simon too many times. So Emilie, I will put you in the hot seat first.
I was trying to decide on a serious or slightly facetious answer, but to be honest, be annoying. Don't give up. Keep pestering at things. The Central Scotland Green Network has only really just started getting the recognition it's been deserved, and we've been at it for 12 years. So don't give up. Keep going. Be perseverant.
Well, thank you very much. And Simon, what would yours be?
I think Emily's sort of picked up a little bit on that. She was saying about being annoying. I'm sort of a bit of a believer in the self-fulfilling prophecy as well. So if I say the thing's going to be true to enough people, then eventually it does become true. So I just go, no, this is what the city's doing. And it's like enough people then believe that that's what we're doing, and so they start doing it. But I think the other thing was it was definitely about the long-term engagement that we've had with communities, and the fact that they are seen to be quite we can. I'm not saying that we get them to lobby on our behalf, because we don't really do, but they can take that comment from the public and be sort of listened to as an additional group, additional sort of resource for us. And at the end of the day, it's our elected members who are making decisions, setting the direction of the council, and they elect them. So at the end of the day, the power really sits with them to drive the council forward.
Thank you, Simon. And Lisa.
Right, I'll try two. So I think one is creativity and time. So creativity, not to underestimate the impact that having creative minds and a sort of injection of people like the Culture Board can have on the process, and not just to think too much in the sort of usual suspects of who might be involved in things like this. So to think wider in that sense. And then time, because when a vision is put out there, it's obviously the end stage, but then making it happen can be a long journey, and then taking people through this in incremental steps. And this is what it could be like in day one, that things can happen tomorrow, but it may not be like that tomorrow. It will take time, and that's in our favor anyway, because that can make all sorts of things possible. So yeah, managing the aspects of the vision over time, I think, is what I would suggest.
Great, thank you ever so much. So a huge thank you to Emilie, Simon and Lisa for your contributions in this session. It's been really